Jim, are we heading for a trade war between China and the United States?
Watch clearly what the new administration says. It is not clear that they'll go beyond rhetoric in the near term. The commentator from Maersk will be right only if it's sound and fury and they don't actually do tariffs. If the US were to impose tariffs on China, that would be a huge move that would really reduce world trade very rapidly. And I do think that that would be something that would be very negative for the economy. For that reason, there's a fair chance that it'll just be rhetoric and just persuasion. But I think it's very dangerous to rely on politicians not implementing their promises. I do think elsewhere, though, on trade, there could be some positives. I'll just give you an example. Theresa May, Prime Minister May, is finding it hard to get willing partners for trade agreements for a post-Brexit UK. I suspect a Trump administration might be very willing to make that an early success. And I think that you could see some attempt at a trade agreement between the UK and the US, much more likely under Trump than it was before.
Give us a sense of China and yuan. I mean, we are seeing market moves, yuan near 6-year lows at the moment. Yeah. Even if we're not completely convinced that the rhetoric will be followed with policy, how do you trade this? How do you manage to put your portfolio in alignment that you're not going to be, having your shirt stripped off?
Yeah, well, that's a very tough one. And, as you say, the yuan is at a multi-year low. But having said that, they had a lot of inflation until about a year or two ago when the deflationary trend caught them. China has not got a massively undervalued currency anymore. That's actually one of the odd commentaries on some of the trade rhetoric. Maybe it was true 10, 15, 20 years ago that China had a drastically undervalued currency in support of their mercantilist policies, but that's not true anymore. And so tariffs would be, maybe a decade or two late, if you like, in terms of the currency manipulation argument. So I'm not particularly positive about China's competitiveness. I think that actually at root is going to fix the issue, tariffs or no tariffs. So I would be a little bit wary of putting an awful lot of money into China. I think also the financial system, there's a lot of debt there. Yeah. There's not going to be a banking crisis in the next year or two. There will be one eventually in China, but it might be 5 or 10 years out because there is just so much debt into borrowers who can't afford to service it in the smokestack industries.
Jim, the US economy is in many ways a very closed economy, but it's not completely closed. We've got some data here which we could show you, which is IMF, Bloomberg data, which kind of highlights this is the net export number, i.e. the deficit figures that we can talk about in terms of the relationship between China and the US and the United States. And this is a very difficult thing for the US economy to try and figure out. If we were to see that trade going away and that deficit having to be changed and some of these parts having to be sort of altered fairly quickly in terms of the way the economy works, what would be the impact of that? A, is it possible actually? And B, what would be the impact in terms of inflation and everything else?
Yeah, I think if you take that analysis, I'm not sure I'd say the US is a closed economy. The way I'd probably stress the positive there and say it's a huge domestic consumer economy, and that dwarfs even quite a large world trade element from the United States. So what that means is anything negative for trade is a minor negative for the United States economy, a massive negative for China that remains very much more dependent on global trade relatively. Although for the last 5 years or so, they've been trying to expand the domestic consumer economy. So if you see the anti-trade rhetoric escalating, and if you see it turning into policy changes, that would be really negative for China and for other emerging markets.
Jim, great to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed for spending so much of your precious time with us today. Jim McCaughan, the CEO of Principal Global Investors.